Hi, this is Don Cusic with the Music Biz, and today my guest is Nanci Griffith. Nancy's a recording artist for MCA now, used to be Philo. Do you remember the first time you sang in public?
Very well. I was 14, and it was Thanksgiving night. Someone had canceled at the Red Dragon in Austin, Texas, which was just a little bar that had acoustic music, and I filled in and did terrible and made $11.
Do you remember when you first wanted to be a singer?
Very well. I remember that too. I'd started playing guitar when I was about 6, and I, played all kinds of different things. And when I was 10 years old, I heard a voice on the radio that was just this pure, pristine voice, and doing exactly what I wanted to do. And it was Carolyn Hester singing "I'll Fly Away," and that just caught my heart.
So you went through high school. Were you playing whatever came up in high school, or talent shows or anything?
No, I really didn't participate too much in high school. I mean, I went to high school, but I didn't participate in any activities in high school because I was very busy playing clubs around town. My parents would take me. There were several clubs at that time in Austin that had acoustic music, and opened a lot of shows, and went to listen to music a lot, and just played as often as I could. Whenever somebody would hire me, I'd do it.
And then through college, the same thing?
Through college, the same thing.
Now, after you got out of college, didn't you go teaching school for a while?
I taught school for 2 years, and the first year kindergarten, second year first grade, and finally decided that there wasn't a whole lot of difference between teaching first grade and playing to a bar all night, from 10 to 2. It was about the same mentality, actually, so I decided I really loved the music a little bit more.
Were you getting enough bookings to take off then?
No, not really. It took a long time before I was really making a living. In fact, I didn't start making a living at music until I started traveling.
And how did you get started traveling?
A friend of mine, Bill Staines, who's a folk performer, premier folk performer around the country, has written many songs people consider to be classics, came through Texas a lot, and he took me out with him, opening shows for him and singing with him. And that kind of opened doors for me in other parts of the country, the Midwest, the Northeast, and Canada. And after that, started going back on my own. And then Carolyn Hester came along, and we became friends as adults. And she took me out on tour with her, which was wonderful because she hadn't toured in 15 years. And it was my first big national tour.
So it was mostly a word-of-mouth thing. You didn't have a high-powered booking agent doing all this for you?
I didn't have a booking agent till 2 years ago, and I did all my own management and negotiated all my recording contracts with Rounder, which Philo is a subsidiary of Rounder Records, and did 4 albums for them, and did just fine, really, on the scale that I was, and approached the top of the folk circuit, which was all I ever expected, really, to achieve in my career, and really didn't notice not having a manager or a booking agent or any of those things until I moved to Nashville, and people started cutting my songs, and I started getting major label offers, and I didn't know what to do,
Yeah. So was it difficult being a woman in that position? Did that make any difference?
I think that one of the things that really helped me a lot on the folk circuit was that, number one, I was a female. There were not very many females who were willing to get out and get in their car by themselves and drive out across America. And number two, there were not very many female songwriters on the folk circuit. And it had gotten real stale, what was going on in folk music at that particular time. So I think it was a plus for me that I was female, and because I was a songwriter, and I wasn't compared to Bob Dylan. I think male folk singers or country folk singers always have that problem of being compared to someone else, even though they're nothing alike, So actually it was a plus for me.
Did you have a problem with drunks at 2 in the morning, or?
I'd like I said, spent all those years in high school and college playing honky-tonks, so drunks have never been a problem for me.
How about I forgot what I was going to ask you. I wanted to ask you about how you first got recording.
The first album
record?
I did came along. I was playing in a bar in Austin called The Hole in the Wall, and there was a gentleman named Mike Williams who had his own little record label, and he came in to hear me and asked if I would do a compilation album that they were working on, which was going to be of several of the Austin artists. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to, and went in and did 3 songs. And the response was very good, so went back and did a full album for him.
Now, was this Philo?
No, this was BF Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, Philo picked up that album.
Okay, how did you get with Philo? What is Philo?
Philo is a subsidiary of Rounder Records, which is the largest independent label. They're always called this little tiny label, but actually Rounder is a conglomerate just like any other major label. They just happen to be called independent. And I was touring a lot in the Northeast, and they're based in Boston, Cambridge actually. And they approached me about distributing my earlier albums, eventually wanted them for the label. And I had co-produced Once in a Very Blue Moon with Jim Rooney here in Nashville. And they approached me about releasing that on their label. So eventually we came up to Last of True Believers, and Jim Rooney and I produced that one particularly for Rounder.
Did you sell the albums on the road when you on these first albums?
Yes.
Is that mainly where your sales came from?
Until Rounder picked it up, it was most of my sales, because distribution is the most difficult thing to come by for an independent label. And actually it really helps too. If you're traveling, you're going into a new market, say, and you're not going to fill the house and you're not going to make much money that evening. Your album sales will make up for that, make a difference.
How about exposure in the media? Did you get on the radio or on television, in magazines, newspapers, anywhere along in there?
It was surprising to me because I didn't even know what a publicist was until 2 years ago, and I had gotten a lot of reviews, New York Times and major newspapers, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Nashville, Houston, Austin. And, they were surprised. They said, who was your publicist before now? And I said, I didn't have one. These were just things they picked up on themselves.
What did you do? Did you send out a press kit or invite them to the show? Or?
Most of the time I would find out who the entertainment writers were of that particular newspaper, and I would send them an itinerary and a note and say, I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Nanci Griffith, and I'm coming to your area, and if you get a chance to listen to my record or drop a line or come to the show, we'd love to have you.
And you got good response from that?
It seemed to work, it seemed to work, and I don't know why, because now that I know how the whole process works, it seems phenomenal that it did work.
Maybe it was a relief from all the high pressure they get.
I guess it could have been, because I'm terrified of talking to people on the telephone, so I very rarely called anyone.
Now, folk music is no longer people singing Barbara Allen. Isn't it mostly the singer-songwriters now? I
think so. I think it's mostly singer-songwriters. I'm very proud to be part of it. I'm proud to also be part of country music, because I've always ridden the fence of those two things. But I think nowadays it's mostly singer-songwriters. I think you get classified as a folk performer if you're standing out there with a guitar without your band. It doesn't matter what kind of music you're playing.
Did you ever use tracks?
No, I wouldn't do that ever. That would be, for me, just as much of a crime for my music as if I would go into the studio and overdub everything one piece at a time, which I don't do either. We record as a band, everybody together. Okay,
now you signed with MCA. How did that come about?
The Philo Rounder records had sold quite well, Once in a Very Blue Moon, and Last of the True Believers had sold as many copies as most major label country albums had sold. And we started getting offers from major labels. And Tony Brown at MCA and I just seemed to have a rapport. And so that was the choice, because Tony liked what I did and didn't want to change anything. And that was very important, to keep the music as it was and have a producer, co-producer that you really enjoyed working with.
That was going to be my next question, because with a major label, you've got the big audience looking at you. Were they more involved in the material this time, or Or they pretty much left it up to you?
They didn't change a thing, which is what I was looking for. Because, like I said earlier, I never expected anything more than to reach the top of the folk circuit. That was very important to me. And so anything else was a bonus. And I'm too darn old and stubborn to change by now. And so it was very important to find the label that knew what I did, knew that I already had an audience out there across the country, and that they already had pre-sales. They didn't have to worry about sales for a while. But opening up what I did to the country market and commercial country radio, and broadening this audience was all they were going to be doing. And I don't think the music needed to be changed to do that.
How about management? How did you find, you've got a management company now, how did you find them or they find you?
Well, I was very fortunate. Ken Levitan is my manager, and Dan Goodman at Vector. And Ken was my attorney, and he's the best darn entertainment attorney in Nashville. And so when he decided to go into management, I was the first one he came to and asked if I'd be interested. Of course I was interested, because he's very good at what he does. I don't know anyone who doesn't like him. He's not pushy. He's a real good manager.
How about publicists and all that that you've hinted at? Did you go about collecting all of these people and building a whole network?
Well, publicist was just like anything else. You have to meet with the publicist and decide. It was just like choosing a major label, actually. Decide what publicist is the best for you. And Network Inc. was the best for me. They handled artists that were heroes for me, people I actually listened to. And they seemed to understand what I was doing. They understood I was a writer, that I wasn't just a girl singer, which is a horrible label that gets put on women in country music. And you know, that was very important to me. So Network Inc. was where I settled for a publicist.
You've seen a difference coming from Texas, where the music is the most important thing. There's a certain purity there, to it being kind of a big business. Have you changed your outlook on all that? I mean, surely you didn't imagine all of the big business when you started, is it?
Well, I knew there was a lot of business involved. And I think that living in Nashville has made things much more comfortable for me. Basically because when I lived in Texas, I was constantly nervous about, oh, I've got to take care of my publishing, I've got to take care of this and take care of that. And there is no business center in Texas for music. There's a lot of music there, but no business center. In Nashville, everything is centered, you know. You can go up and down Music Row a couple of times a week and you've taken care of your business. You're through. It's over, you know, and it's off your mind.
How about publishing? Did you set up your own publishing company very early?
I set up my own publishing company several years ago, Griff Mill Music, and was a writer for ASCAP. And as time went on, I decided that BMI was a better place for me in country music, and so I kept my Griff Mill ASCAP company and started Wing and Wheel on BMI and joined BMI as a writer.
So you think that's an advantage for a writer to have their own publishing company? Has it worked best for you?
Well, it certainly has for me. Since I do write, you know, almost all of my material, I think it's, I was outperforming my own material, which in a sense is shopping my own material, and making my own records, which was also, you know, in a sense shopping my own material. So me signing with a publisher would have been very defeating because I didn't need that monthly salary from a publisher, and so there was no point. It was better for me to keep my own publishing, take care of it myself, and I've just recently signed with Bug Music, and they administer my two publishing companies and make sure everything is taken care of, and copyrights are sent in and registered and all that stuff.
That gets to be a hassle too, doesn't it? When you
it had
an
gotten to be,
yeah,
it had gotten to be, and so that's why Bug Music is there, and they do a very good job, and at a much lesser, they're not taking half of my money at the same time.
Now, are on other people cutting your songs? I know you had Love at the Five and Dime. Have other people cut, besides Kathy Mattea, some of your songs?
A lot of folk artists have cut my songs, and none of them have been, you know, major label cuts. But right now we have 6 songs being held by different artists, you know, through their major label.
Now, was that from you pitching them, or was that from Bug pitching
Bug
them?
Music.
Now, on the earlier cuts, how did they come about? From them knowing you and hearing you sing the songs?
Hearing it at a folk festival, or hearing someone else do the song, or learning it off a record. Or,
Talk about folk festivals. Is there a circuit for folk performers?
every summer. Yeah.
And it consists of festivals?
There are festivals all over the country. Canada has the best festivals, actually, and you can start in Montreal in late June and not stop playing festivals until Vancouver in late August. And Winnipeg is a huge festival, draws between 50 and 70,000 people every year. Vancouver is the next largest, and there's usually about 45,000 at that festival. Edmonton, you know, just north of there, is a great festival. And then I'm a director of a festival in Texas, the Kerrville Music Festival, which draws about 25,000 people per year.
Who's the folk music audience now?
I think the folk music audience right now is the audience that was buying country music 10 years ago. And they, I think, got disillusioned. I think the folk audience, for the majority of them, I wouldn't say educated, but I would just say people who are very aware, who read, as opposed to watching television. I think they were the people who were out honky-tonking 10 years ago and were really into Jerry Jeff Walker and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. And they, I think, have felt disillusioned because country music started trying to homogenize everything to the lowest common intellectual denominator, and they didn't fit into that. Where they were, every time they turned on their radio, a lyric was insulting them, so they turned country music off and went to country folk.
Is there's not the students that there were in the 60s. It's an older audience, isn't it?
It is for some performers. For me, my audience, the majority of my audience right now is between 15 and 25. I have a lot of young people in my audience, and am delighted with that, because that's a very special thing, I think, because that particular age group hasn't been interested in country music for quite some time. And I know that those young people think of me as being avant-garde folk or something of that sort, you know, and they would never put country music on me as a label. But they're wonderful. You know, it's wonderful to look out in my audience and see people with spiked hairdos and new wave outfits sitting next to people who watch CMTV and Nashville Network regularly with bolo ties on. And then you look at someone over in a tweed jacket and a pipe, you know, and they're all sitting together and they're all getting along and they're all having a good time.
You've got a strange audience out there.
They're great, great. I just love my audience because there's such a variety.
You toured with the Everly Brothers too. How did that come about as an opening act?
I don't really know how that came about, except that I know that Phil Everly had seen me on television, and so when my name came up as a possibility for an opening act, he already was familiar with my music and that sort of thing. But I loved it. Their audience was great. That was really going to remain one of the more special things that's ever happened to me in my career.
Okay, looking at your career so far, is there anything you think you would do different to help make things a little easier? Or?
Well, I used to think if I was going to do it different, that I would not go out traveling across America by myself and spend a good 6 years of my life just going straight to America. I would try to go through the industry more and not be such a rebel and a renegade in my music. But now I really look at it, I don't think I'd even change that, because my audience is always going to be there. I'm not something that was manufactured by the media. I'm not something that was manufactured by a record label. I was there, you know, I was with them, and my audience was with me all the way, the building process.
So you're not dependent upon that hit single to make or break you right now. You've got...
I'm already comfortable. I'm already satisfied with what I have in my audience in Canada and the U.S. and Europe, and I wouldn't change a thing, really.
You said the festivals are big in the summer for folk music. Where do you play in the winter?
Anywhere, you know, that you want to. The Midwest is actually, northern climates, it's the best time to be playing. More people go out to hear music in those areas of the country during the winter than they do in the spring, summer, and fall, because when the weather's nice, they want to go outside.
You get cabin fever.
Yeah, so anywhere you want to. There's a great market for
Is it mostly
acoustic
clubs?
music. There are a lot of concert series that are going on right now around the country for what I do, which is, I call what I do folkabilly. And you know, I think singer-songwriters, it's a good time for singer-songwriters. I know John Prine and Guy Clark and I kind of follow each other around on the same circuit, and so there are a lot of us doing it.
Okay. Well, thank you. And that's the end of part 1 of the interview with Nanci Griffith. Hi, this is Don Cusic with the Music Biz, and this is part 2 of the interview with Nanci Griffith. And on this part of the interview, we're going to be talking about Nanci's songwriting. And the first question, Nanci, is do you remember the first song you ever wrote?
No, not really. I know one of the first songs that I wrote was a really silly song about a railroad accident. And my father still has that on tape. I think one of the worst things probably ever happened in my life is that my father had a little studio in the house, a little 2-track recording studio, so he has everything logged. It's all there, you know, and it's blackmail.
Is this where you first heard yourself singing on tape?
Uh-huh.
And your first impressions of yourself singing?
Well, I never liked my voice, you know, recording-wise, but it helped me with harmony because my dad was a barbershop quartet singer, so I learned how to sing harmony and hear 4-part harmony by listening to a barbershop quartet. And when you translate that into a female voice, sometimes it doesn't work the same way. So by him having his little studio in there and going in on weekends and recording things, and me listening back and finding the right harmonies, and that worked for me, working with myself and my own voice, that helped a lot.
How did you get started writing? I mean, what caused you to start writing songs?
I started writing songs just because my hero, Carolyn Hester, was a songwriter, and she wrote these songs that were stories that had characters that just reached out and touched your heart, and they were people that you knew in your neighborhood, that even though you knew they weren't those real people, but they were people that you knew in your heart, and that's, you know, what started me wanting to do that.
How about, other than Carolyn, who were some of the other influences on you?
Well, later on in high school, Jon Stewart was a big influence on me. Of course, he wrote Daydream Believer for the Monkees, and he's written many classic songs. He was a big influence. And I would say Lynn Anderson, Loretta Lynn, they really got me listening more to country music again when they came along, because they brought, I thought, country music out of the dark ages for women, you know, because there was kind of that gap when Patsy Cline was gone, and then Loretta Lynn hit it big, and Lynn Anderson came along and turned the tide around. And later on, Dolly Parton,
Did they influence you as a singer or as a writer or both?
I think as a writer or as a direction that I wanted to go in. Dolly Parton's writing and Loretta Lynn's writing, both are so unique. They had their own individual style, just like prose writers. I mean, only Loretta Lynn could rhyme holler a daughter. I mean, you know, only Loretta Lynn could do that. It's very regional and ingenious lyric writing. Her lyrics stand up on their own, you know, they're wonderful lyrics. She very rarely gets credit for that.
I know you read a lot. Were there authors that influenced you?
A lot of authors. Eudora Welty, I think, was the savior of my youth. You know, she gave me justification for being a rebellious youth, for one thing. And she was such a marvelous writer. Just always, her writing was so conversational. Makes you very comfortable from the first page on. It's very good for a youth. And writers in general, literature was a great escape for me during my adolescence and my youth, because I had such wanderlust and so many things that I wanted to do, and I could do them through literature.
Did these writers influence you with ideas or in giving you depth?
I think they gave me a sense of place. Eudora Welty especially, because she has said many times that music is prose and prose is music, and prose should flow like music flows. And so she gave me a sense of place. I think it was very difficult reconciling being not only a songwriter and a musician, but also writing short stories and wanting to be a novelist at the same time, because generally they don't go together. And because of Eudora Welty, I had confidence that I could do both things.
You mentioned novelists. I know you've written a novel. If you had to write the jacket blurb, what would it say for somebody standing in a store?
Boy, I don't know what I would say. I think these are very normal middle-class Texan characters, and it's more or less a middle-class Texas view of America. It starts in the 20s and goes up to 1983, and the title, Two of a Kind Heart, is basically the whole theme of the book, in that in Texas, I don't know about other places, but in Texas in general, it seems like every generation rebels against the generation before them, but they always wind up exactly like the generation before them, with the same little idiosyncrasies and eccentricities. And so that, therefore, Two of a Kind Heart.
Writing a novel is a lot different discipline than writing a song. How did you just quit writing songs for 6 months or a period of time to write the novel? Or?
It took me 4.5 years to write the novel, and I wrote on it every day, whether I wanted to or not. I'd try to put in a good 3 hours on it every day. And music was a separate thing. And music is usually so immediate, you know, just comes so immediately where you get the guitar out and it's finished. Whereas prose, I really had to work on disciplining myself to work on the novel. And I'm in the middle of writing a second novel now, and I'm taking it a little bit easier and not working on it unless I really have something to work on.
Did you use different like technique? I mean, did you write the novel on the typewriter and the songs with a pen or anything like that, or did you?
Well, I've always written songs with a pen, and the novel has always been on a typewriter. And I tried to switch with this novel to a word processor, but I missed the sound of my typewriter, and I couldn't work on a word processor. So.
How about short stories? Don't you write some short stories too?
I write short stories a lot, and a lot of those are written by pen, because I'll have an idea on the road, and I'll sit down and work on a short story.
How hard is it to write a novel being on the road?
That was a little bit tough. I had a little portable typewriter, and I took it with me everywhere I went on the road, which is most of the time being
Did you
out on
pull
the
off
road.
at rest stops and?
No, I
3
never
hours?
did that. But you know, I'd either be staying with a friend or in a hotel room every night. And when you get up in the morning, you sit down at the typewriter and work for 3 hours before you hit the road.
Is that the best time for you to write the prose? Is it morning?
Morning was definitely the best time to work on prose for me, just because your mind is clear. Nobody's called and told you you're going to be evicted from your building or anything of that sort, you know, yet. So early morning is a great time because you have a real clear mind.
Songs, do they come at a different time of day?
Songs come whenever they want to. They just seem to have little lives of their own.
So you didn't apply the discipline of the novel writing to your songwriting?
No.
In the same way? Do you write songs with a performance in mind? Do you imagine standing in front of an audience with a song?
That's never mattered to me. I think the songs, when I'm working on a song, if it has a little vocal catch in it, something that I really like, I have to really enjoy singing it for it to continue to be part of the repertoire.
Do you want to, I mean, is that how you measure a song, whether it's good or bad, how it goes with the audience, or do you have your own internal?
I pretty much let the audience decide what stays and what gets a ticket home, you know?
Yeah. That's how you decide what comes up on the albums?
Usually, yeah.
I noticed on the last album you didn't write as much. You wrote, and other people wrote, what, 4?
4 out of the 11.
Yeah.
That's about the same as Once in a Very Blue Moon album. Was about equal to that. And you just go through times. Last of the True Believers, there was only 2 songs on the album that weren't mine. And this time around there were these great songs by friends that I'd heard, and so it ended up being, you know, 7 of my songs and 4 of friends of mine. And the next album may be all mine, or it may be 9 of somebody else. It's just, I never try to weigh things as to whether or not I wrote it. You know, it just is whether or not it's a good song.
Have you thought about a concept album, or?
Well, Last of True Believers was definitely a concept album, because it is an album about couples. And Once in a Very Blue Moon kind of took you from the beginning of a relationship to the end of a relationship. So I think that that in a sense I work around the concept when I get ready to do an album, and try to keep that centered. And I don't like listening to albums that jump from one track being totally wild and crazy, and then laid back, then wild and crazy. You know, I like an album that gives you a sense of flow.
Let me ask you some specific songs, and maybe you can tell me where they came from. Last of the True Believers. How did that come about?
Last of the True Believers is a song about home. And
you got that line, "You can go home."
Yeah.
Or "You can go home again." What is it? "You can go home."
Looks like home again.
Yeah. How about "Love at the Five and Dime"?
I Love at the Five and Dime was written for a workshop at one of the Canadian festivals last year, and it was a workshop that all the songwriters were supposed to have songs they'd written about musicians' domestic life on the road. And I didn't have anything similar to that concept, so the night before I had pulled these 2 characters, Eddie and Rita, who were a short story of mine, and pulled them and wrote the song Love at the Five and Dime. And the Five and Dime had always been real special to me, because when I was in school I had to change buses at the Woolworths at 6th and Congress in Austin every day. And I'd have time to go in and look through the record bins, and I've just always had a special fondness for Woolworth stores. So the song came straight from the short story and for a workshop.
Do you look at songwriting as another form of fiction, or do you try to make that more autobiographical?
No, it's all fiction. I look at writing songs as just another extension of writing a short story.
More Than a Whisper.
More Than a Whisper I co-wrote with a poet in Texas by the name of Bobby Nelson, who's been a fixture in the music industry for the past 20 years. And I had started the song many years ago, and Bobby had always remembered it, and we were out drinking wine one night, and she said, "Let's finish this song," and we sat down and finished it, and both of us just crying away by the time we finished.
You have
the
a
song.
line in there, "I've never been a fool when my heart was on the line." I think I got that quoted right. Yeah, the topic of fools comes up in your songs a lot. Have you?
Yeah, and I contradict myself with it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a definition of a fool that you try to avoid, or?
Well, I think people can do things to themselves, you know, emotionally, and blame other people when it's actually them who did it to themselves. So usually if I do that, I'll call myself the fool. And if someone else does that in my behalf, I'll call them the fool.
How about Bank of the Pontchartrain?
Banks of the Pontchartrain is one of my all-time favorite songs, and I wrote that sitting up in Montreal in January for a 2-week stint there in Montreal in the snow. It actually snowed every day, never got above 12 degrees, and was freezing. And I stayed underground the whole time. You know, Montreal has an underground city. And I'd actually go to sleep at night and I'd dream about going back. My cousins all live in Slidell, Louisiana. So I'd dream about going back and playing on the Pontchartrain with my cousins.
There's something interesting in that song. The guy has green eyes, which always jumps out at you. Why is there any special reason you picked?
Probably because the Pontchartrain is green, you know.
Oh, okay. Looking for the Time, about the Working Girl.
Working Girl is it's a non-fiction fiction story of, of an event that happened in New York when we were playing in New York. One time our bass player was late getting home to his wife, and no one had a watch. He went up to this very straight, official-looking woman on the corner and asked her what time it was, and he didn't come back in the bar for hours. And when he came back in, he said, "I've just been lectured, and it's terrible. You can't tell the preppies from the working girls anymore." And she had apparently given him a very, very long, over coffee, you know, lecture about how rude it was to interrupt someone who was working if you weren't buying.
One of these days. That's about living in New York, or?
One of these days was I really felt like I'd written about me. You know, I love New York, and I love going to New York, and there's just something magical about being in New York for me.
Have you ever lived there?
No, but I'm up there at least once a month, and have spent an enormous amount of time. I have a lot of friends in New York. There's something very creatively magic about New York that can't be beat. It just, you walk into Greenwich Village and electricity soars through you, and it just makes you want to go find your own place and write, because you know everyone else is, you know.
Well, why did you write that line? And I don't know what song it's in. New York sort of brings out the stupids in me.
It does, you know. It does, because it always takes me a couple of days before I stop feeling stupid when I'm in New York.
I wish I could remember what that song.
It's been on a red brick floor.
Okay. Love's Found a Shoulder.
Oh, Love's Found a Shoulder, I think, is something that everyone's done, you know. You spend a long time between relationships, and after a while, you just begin to live in your own fantasies until you find something that's real. You just soon have an infatuation, you know, and never get to know the person that you really...
The theme of unrequited love's quite strong in your stuff, too. Is that planned, or it just kind of comes out?
No, it's not planned. It comes up, you know. I've found that in today's society it's a very common thing.
How about Fly By Night?
Fly By Night is one of my favorite songs, too. There was a song the first song I ever sang when I was a little bitty kid was a song called "Standing on the Corner Watching All the Girls Go By." And I've always loved that song, but I can't sing it, you know. So I was just sitting around one day, and I came up with the line, you know, standing on the corner watching the menfolk go by, and wrote "Fly By Night" around that.
There seemed to be a very women's lib statement in there. Let's see if I get it right. I'm coming out of your pocket into my own. Did you intend it at that, or? Well,
that's a twist around of a lot of my songs are a twist of a regional saying. You know, in Texas we say, "I'm going to be out of pocket for a while," which means nobody can find you, and that particular line was a twist of that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I did that in Daddy Said too, which was 6 to 1. The old saying, 6 to 1, half a dozen another, and I changed it to 6 to 1, half a dozen no breaker.
And you can't go fishing. You can't learn to fish on a borrowed line.
Right.
That's a double meaning on that one too. The Wing and the Wheel.
The Wing and the Wheel was inspired by a couple of musicians who are from Managua, Nicaragua, and we did the whole Canadian circuit last year. We traveled all the way across Canada together, and late at night they would get me over in their hotel room trying to sing harmony in Spanish to all of their material. And they're the equivalent of Spanish Everly Brothers, except they are brother and sister instead of two brothers. And beautiful harmonies, lovely songs, just magnificent. Jackson Browne produced their last album, If You Were Looking. But we were in Vancouver, and it was the last night of the festival, and they came over to get me to come drink, and sing harmony and party, and I couldn't do it because I was so sad because I knew I was never going to see them again. So I just sat in my room and listened to them and wrote The Wing and the Wheel.
Touching story. Marilyn Monroe, Neon and Waltzes. I take it you've read the Norman Mailer.
I did,
book.
Yeah. I read a lot of things to write that song. I wrote that song in about 76 or 77 and read everything that was available at the time on her, just because I remembered that the exact day and what I was doing when I heard that Marilyn Monroe had died. And most of my friends did too. It was sort of like, where were you when John Kennedy was shot? Where were you when Martin Luther King died? You know, she was part of America. She was very much a statement. And when she died, an era went.
Heart of a Miner.
Heart of a Miner was written literally driving across West Texas, making that little trek from Lubbock up through New Mexico into Colorado. It's probably the most boring trek of highway you can ever go across. If you start out in Lubbock, just a tad bit depressed, you'll be suicidal by the time you hit New Mexico.
Well, it's good to write songs in there because you don't have to watch the road.
Right.
How about one of my favorites, Julianne?
Julianne was written about, it was a compilation of two characters in Houston of women who hung out in bars. One of them was very young, and one of them was an older, kind of elegant wino who hung out in Old Market Square in Houston. She would come into the bars around closing time and dance. And, you know, people always made fun of her, but I always thought she had a lot of class, you know, and therefore the song came about.
Do you do that one live much?
I haven't done it in a while. It used to be a regular part of my show, and I haven't done it in a couple years, but it'll come back. The songs just seem to do that.
It seemed to be one of those things that if you're sitting in a club, it just kind of would quiet everything down.
It did. It was very good for that, yeah.
How about, oh, you've got a line in there. I've got a note on this. Men don't fear the wells of time, for the years will bring them something, while the women count the wrinkles and children in their homes.
Yeah, I just, it hit me. Of course, the next line after that is, but if I'm blinded here tomorrow, I'm blessed by the beauty of chance to recall Julianne, you know, in dance. But I think that's very true. You know, I think that women have always been taught to spend more time worrying about how many wrinkles they have on their face and how many children they have, instead of other things.
Well, I thought, when I heard that, I thought, well, maybe she doesn't like being a woman. She'd rather be a man. Are you envious of them? Not.
No,
I mean, are you envious of?
I've never been envious of the of that. You know, certainly have never wanted to change.
Good. You Can't Go Home Again.
You Can't Go Home Again was, you know, really influenced by Thomas Wolfe, and
which contradicts the song on another album saying you can go home.
Yeah. Well, Austin, Texas was being my hometown. There were so many musicians, and I always felt like that I had never really, I could draw 3,000 people in Boston, and I could only draw 500 in Austin, you know, and I always felt, oh, that, you know, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't my hometown accept me as much as I'm accepted in other parts of the world? And so that's what the song was about, being sad that you couldn't, I couldn't be home more, you know, I couldn't actually come home because there was no place for me to be there.
How about October Reasons?
October Reasons, I can't recall what the stimulus was for writing that. I know it just
What do you mean by
about.
I'm not going to let your blue take the prize?
Well, I don't think that anyone else's emotions, I don't think anyone should ever allow anyone else's emotions to completely drag them down. You know, I think that you can only help someone, and especially at the end of a relationship, if you're the one that's leaving, you can only help the other person make it easy for them.
I thought it might have been a
so many
competitive
ways.
thing, you know, because there's a blue ribbon and then there's a big purple championship ribbon. For some reason I thought maybe that was I'm not going to let your blue take the prize, I'm going to be the champ or something.
No.
No meaning there,
No
okay.
meaning.
I missed that one. Wheels, you're in New York again, right?
I had a friend who actually was going to the University of Texas, used to bring his study group in to hear me play every Sunday night in Austin, and they were all just so idealistic. They were all going to law school, and they were all going to do wonderful things when they got out of law school. And this one particular fellow was really hot on going to work for the American Indian movement. And we were all excited for him, you know, great, you know, you're gonna do this, and he had offers, you know, and was ready to go work for the American Indian movement. And his last year of law school, he got an offer that for when he finished to go to work for a firm on Wall Street. He took it.
So much for idealism.
When he left, you know, someone said, you really ought to write something for Gordon, because we're all, you know, he writes us how unhappy he is living in New York and working on Wall Street. And I said, I'll write something for Gordon, but I'm not going to feel sorry for him.
Do you see that maybe happening to yourself?
Oh, no.
The idealism maybe?
No, because I've never given up on it. I'm too stubborn, you know.
Yeah. What's the next one? Working in Corners.
Working in Corners was, I think it's pretty much just a definitive musician song of traveling alone and
Yeah, that line,
playing.
I'll never be a fool, but I'll always gamble foolishly. There's your theme of fools again. Right?
Yeah, yeah. That one holds true. That one still holds water after all these years.
Waltzing with the Angels.
Waltzing with the Angels is somewhat autobiographical for me, so it's just a little story song.
How about Trouble with Roses?
Trouble with Roses, I can't really recall what inspired me to write that, except that people bring me roses a lot to shows, you know. So.
It said the boys are the ones that ask the questions, and the men always know.
And the man who knows, that's right, that's very true, I think.
Poet in My Window.
Poet in My Window was written for my ex-husband, and who, you know, when we split up, we both had hard roads to travel when we split up, and it was just kind of a boost of I believe in you. You know?
Cold Hearts, Closed Minds.
I wrote that a long time ago, even though it's just coming out on this new album, and I had known several people who were writing jingles and really doing well at writing jingles and commercials and trying to get me involved in it. And it seemed to be affecting their whole personality. And they weren't writing music anymore. They weren't writing real songs anymore. It just seemed like everything they were writing was influenced by this jingle writing. So that's where Cold Hearts, Closed Minds came from.
The jingle business.
Yeah.
Beacon Street.
Beacon Street is about Beacon Street. Anybody who's ever been to Boston knows that Beacon Street is about the only street that runs all the way through town, and the train runs right down the center of the street. And I used to stay in a hotel right on Beacon Street every time I went. I don't anymore, because now I realize that the reason I wasn't sleeping was because the train woke me up every 10 minutes.
How about, another favorite, 40 Econoline.
40 Econoline is a non-fiction fiction story of Rosalie Sorrell's great escape from Salt Lake City in 1963. And Rosalie Sorrell is one of my favorite all-time folk singers. You know, she's bridged a gap that for many years it's been left open with other folk singers retiring. And
she was escaping a husband.
She was escaping her husband. She had 5 children and a 40 Econoline van. And the interesting thing about that song was it not only goes out to Rosalie, but Rosalie and I did a tour together. And at the end of the tour, we were playing at the Great American Music Hall, and I'd written one verse in the chorus to 40 Econoline, and I closed the show with that as a dedication to Rosalie. And Kate Wolf, who is another dear friend of ours and marvelous folk singer, she just died of leukemia this last fall. And Kate was there, and she came backstage and came into my dressing room, and she said, you know that song you wrote about Rosalie's life? I know you haven't finished it yet, so I just wanted to tell you, forget Rosalie, this is my life, but is it too late to change it to a Dodge van? She made her great escape in a Dodge van, so it's really about both of them.
Trouble in the Fields.
Trouble in the Fields is, most of my family came from West Texas, and they were dryland farmers, and they survived the Great Depression. And I have one great uncle left that still has a farm out near Lockney. And these hard times are very easy for that generation to understand because the farmers now are having such a difficult time. And I know they feel very alone, and they're not. The generation before them of farmers is really pulling for them. And those that survived the Great Depression in West Texas and Oklahoma and Colorado really know what hard times they're going through.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of part 2 of the interview with Nanci Griffith, and this is Don Cusic with the Music Biz.